Chapter 16 Part B. The message from my lady informed me that the magistrate at Freising Hall had written to remind her about the 3 Indians. Early in the coming week, the rogues must needs be released, and left free to follow their own devices. If we had any more questions to ask them, there was no time to lose. Having forgotten to mention this, when she had last seen Sergeant Cuff, my mistress now desired me to supply the omission. The Indians had gone clean out of my head, as they have, no doubt, gone clean out of yours. I didn't see much use in stirring that subject again. However, I obeyed my orders on the spot, as a matter of course. I found Sergeant Cuff and the gardener, with a bottle of Scotch whiskey between them, head over ears in an argument on the growing of roses. The sergeant was so deeply interested that he held up his hand, and signed to me not to interrupt the discussion, when I came in. As far as I could understand it, the question between them was, whether the white moss rose did, or did not, require to be budded on the dog rose to make it grow well. Mr. Begbie said, yes, and Sergeant Cuff said, no. They appealed to me, as hotly as a couple of boys. Knowing nothing whatever about the growing of roses, I steered a middle course, just as Her Majesty's judges do, when the scales of justice bother them by hanging even to a hair. Gentlemen, I remarked, there is much to be said on both sides. In the temporary lull produced by that impartial sentence, I laid my lady's written message on the table, under the eyes of Sergeant Cuff. I had got by this time, as nearly as might be, to hate the sergeant. But truth compels me to acknowledge that, in respect of readiness of mind, he was a wonderful man. In half a minute after he had read the message, he had looked back into his memory for Superintendent Seagrave's report, had picked out that part of it in which the Indians were concerned, and was ready with his answer. A certain great traveler, who understood the Indians and their language, had figured in Mr. Seagrave's report, hadn't he? Very well. Did I know the gentleman's name and address? Very well again. Would I write them on the back of my lady's message? Much obliged to me. Sergeant Cuff would look that gentleman up, when he went to Freising Hall in the morning. Do you expect anything to come of it? I asked. Superintendent Seagrave found the Indians as innocent as the babe unborn. Superintendent Seagrave has been proved wrong, up to this time, in all his conclusions, answered the sergeant. It may be worthwhile to find out tomorrow whether Superintendent Seagrave was wrong about the Indians as well. With that he turned to Mr. Begbie, and took up the argument again exactly at the place where it had left off. This question between us is a question of soils and seasons, and patience and pains, Mr. Gardener. Now let me put it to you from another point of view. You take your white moss rose. By that time, I had closed the door on them, and was out of hearing of the rest of the dispute. In the passage, I met Penelope hanging about, and asked what she was waiting for. She was waiting for her young lady's bell, when her young lady chose to call her back to go on with the packing for the next day's journey. Further inquiry revealed to me, that Miss Rachel had given it as a reason for wanting to go to her aunt at Freising Hall, that the house was unendurable to her, and that she could bear the odious presence of a policeman under the same roof with herself no longer. On being informed, half an hour since, that her departure would be delayed till 2 in the afternoon, she had flown into a violent passion. My lady, present at the time, had severely rebuked her, and then, having apparently something to say, which was reserved for her daughter's private ear, had sent Penelope out of the room. My girl was in wretchedly low spirits about the changed state of things in the house. Nothing goes right, father, nothing is like what it used to be. I feel as if some dreadful misfortune was hanging over us all. That was my feeling too. But I put a good face on it, before my daughter. Miss Rachel's bell rang while we were talking. Penelope ran up the back stairs to go on with the packing. I went by the other way to the hall, to see what the glass said about the change in the weather. Just as I approached the swing door leading into the hall from the servants' offices, it was violently opened from the other side, and Rosanna Spearman ran by me, with a miserable look of pain in her face, and one of her hands pressed hard over her heart, as if the pain was in that quarter. "What's the matter, my girl?" I asked, stopping her. "Are you ill?" "For God's sake, don't speak to me," she answered, and twisted herself out of my hands, and ran on towards the servants' staircase. I called to the cook, who was within hearing, to look after the poor girl. 2 other persons proved to be within hearing, as well as the cook. Sergeant Cuff darted softly out of my room, and asked what was the matter. I answered, "Nothing." Mr. Franklin, on the other side, pulled open the swing door, and beckoning me into the hall, inquired if I had seen anything of Rosanna Spearman. "She has just passed me, sir," with a very disturbed face, and in a very odd manner. "I am afraid I am innocently the cause of that disturbance, Betteridge." "You, sir?" "I can't explain it," says Mr. Franklin, "but, if the girl is concerned in the loss of the diamond, I do really believe she was on the point of confessing everything, to me, of all the people in the world, not 2 minutes since." Looking towards the swing door, as he said those last words, I fancied I saw it opened a little way from the inner side. Was there anybody listening? The door fell to, before I could get to it. Looking through, the moment after, I thought I saw the tails of Sergeant Cuff's respectable black coat disappearing round the corner of the passage. He knew, as well as I did, that he could expect no more help from me, now that I had discovered the turn which his investigations were really taking. Under those circumstances, it was quite in his character to help himself, and to do it by the underground way. Not feeling sure that I had really seen the sergeant, and not desiring to make needless mischief, where, heaven knows, there was mischief enough going on already, I told Mr. Franklin that I thought one of the dogs had got into the house, and then begged him to describe what had happened between Rosanna and himself. "Were you passing through the hall, sir?" I asked. "Did you meet her accidentally, when she spoke to you?" Mr. Franklin pointed to the billiard table. "I was knocking the balls about," he said, "and trying to get this miserable business of the diamond out of my mind. I happened to look up, and there stood Rosanna Spearman at the side of me, like a ghost. Her stealing on me in that way was so strange, that I hardly knew what to do at first. Seeing a very anxious expression in her face, I asked her if she wished to speak to me,